healing power of work. My name is Donna Hardaker, and I am so happy to be talking to you today. And before I begin, I'd like to invite you to take care of yourself. Maybe when you heard about this talk, you thought, oh, this will be interesting. And as I'm telling my story, you begin to think, oh, no, this is not a good day for me to be hearing this kind of a story. Now, I'm not going to be doing anything, dramatic or anything like that. But even just the nature of hearing this kind of story about real struggle inside of a workplace, it just might not be good for you. Maybe something's going on for you today. Maybe someone close to you is struggling. So please just take care of yourself, whatever that means. And perhaps you just close your eyes and just listen. You don't have to see me in order to hear the story. Perhaps you want to get up and walk around, and that's really good for you to do anyways. Maybe you want to just sign off completely and re-engage with this material another time. So when I deliver this talk in front of a live audience, I ask people just with nod of heads, do I know that, I have your commitment to take care of yourselves? So I'm going to imagine that that's what you're doing. And I'm also going to take care of myself as I'm delivering this. I have a throat condition that actually has resulted from a couple of years of chronic stress. And so every now and then I need to actually take a deep breath and just relax my throat so that I can continue to talk. I may also take a sip of water. So you'll also see me taking care of myself. And we have a mutual commitment that that's what we're going to do for ourselves today. So the pandemic, as everyone is likely quite aware by now, it has escalated and exacerbated some common experiences. My story, of course, is unique to me. It has universal truths inside of it and many common experiences. And those experiences are now highlighted, even greater than they ever were before, because of the impact of the deep disruption that's happened to all of us. What I'm hoping that we can do is consider this massive disruption as an opportunity to think about many things differently, including the entirety of our working experience. My vision is that working can be a source of belonging, meaning, harmony, and health for everyone. So as I'm talking, you can listen certainly as an employee, a working individual. Everything that I say applies there. You can also be listening as perhaps a supervisor of people, a people manager. Perhaps you're a decision maker. So you can also listen with those ears. How does this story apply in terms of making decisions for your organization? So I tell my story because I'm lucky. I'm lucky that my life partner, my husband, is still with me. Our marriage survived this terrible time in our lives. I'm lucky that my children are doing okay. They were young teenagers at the time, and essentially I abandoned them, emotionally abandoned them. I am lucky that I was able to reinvent myself professionally very quickly. I was lucky that I had access to services and treatment. I am lucky that I knew how to advocate for myself, even though I was so unwell and the struggle was so profound. I figured out how to advocate for myself. And I'm lucky because I have tremendous privilege. And when I think about this, I reflect that we shouldn't have to rely on luck. We all need better systems around us. And this is a time when we can be thinking about that, thinking about the systems that surround us. So I was working in a job and a career that I loved. I was a rising star in a very dynamic education program, highly productive. I was very creative, very engaged, and I was promoted very quickly promoted from a casual employee to part-time into a full-time staff position in a unionized environment without a competition. So a lot of strings were pulled, rules were broken, but I loved it. It was great for me. And within 2 years, I was in the doghouse. I was completely socially isolated. I was struggling. I was miserable. I made everybody else miserable. It was a nightmare. And I truly believe that the whole nightmare, the nightmare for me, for my family, for my coworkers, for my manager, for all of us, it all could have been prevented. And inside of how I view this is that I didn't have any awareness of my working conditions. I didn't have thoughts about what is this thing called work? What is it that I'm doing when I go to work? And going to work applies whether we're at home working virtually or whether we actually physically are going into a workplace. It is still going to work. And I had no concept that when any of us go to work, we step inside of systems. The systems are, some of them might be working well, but a lot of them aren't. And a lot of them are like unconscious, informal systems. And I came out of this whole experience thinking from a systems perspective. And I think that that's part of that is the key for all of us to think differently. So the working conditions that I experienced were not uncommon to many, many workplaces. We were chaotic. So we had very little organization around meetings. We didn't take minutes. We didn't have agendas. It was quite sort of by the seat of the pants. And there was even a culture where that was valued. We thought, aren't we great? Because we always pull things out of the fire. And it was interesting. And at the time, I didn't enjoy it, but it was okay. I could manage. I could deal. I personally had very few limits or boundaries around my time. So the person I most closely was partnered with, she would pick me up. We would drive into work and we would talk about work the whole time. Then I'd do the full day of work. She would drive me home and we would continue to talk about work. And then she would call me in the evenings and we would keep talking about work. So I didn't have an understanding of not doing that because I was so interested in the work. I was so excited to be doing this amazing job. And I was happy to be working with her. But that was another red flag that I wasn't aware of at the time. Like many workplaces, there was hierarchy. And inside of hierarchy, some people have more power than other people. And I was at the bottom. And it was interesting having to witness the power that people have when they are formally higher up in the hierarchy and the impact it can have on others. We were told often that our work was going to dry up at any time. We never knew. So we were told, don't think you have a job for life or even a job for the next few months, because we never know if our projects are going to be pulled, they're going to give the work to somebody else. So there was a culture of fear there. One thing that happens when you're very successful at work is that you get more work. So my workload doubled over the course of a year without any additional resources. And we also had a culture of favorites on our team. And so I was just keenly aware. And of course, I was the favorite. So as the rising star, this was just something that was great for me. And I, of course, thought it'll never happen to me. What I do see happening to other people being thrown under the bus, I thought, well, that's never going to happen to me. And I also had a private office with my coworker with whom we were doing a lot of the project work together. And we could close the door to the office. So we kept out a lot of the noise and chaos, but we moved into a cubicle environment. So very, very open. And of course, now no privacy. I couldn't control noise. I was right beside the kitchen and the busiest path. So a lot of disruptions, a lot of interruptions. And there was always the smell of burning coffee, burning popcorn, and burnt toast. So, so it was, I navigated and managed this. And I noticed, and I was aware enough to notice that I started to get kind of crabby about all these things. I started to, what I know now was the beginning of burnout. I was grumbling when a new problem would emerge, and that's all that our job was. It was to solve a multitude of problems. And instead of rising to the occasion and going, great, I get to apply all my skills, my tools, my knowledge, I get to apply them to the new problem. Instead, I had a grumbling, an angry, a frustrated response. I started to have bad dreams where I was just constantly working on my workplace problems while I was sleeping, and I was tired. So this was already starting. And then I was in a car accident. I had a moderate whiplash injury, and everything that I had already been experiencing, it's like it all just exploded. Every single thing that had just kind of bothered me a little bit before now was escalated. I changed, my behavior changed. So I went from being the person who was easy, agreeable, excited, fun, one of the social connectors. I was one of the social glue people on our team. I went from that to be angry and irritable. I was having panic attacks. I was crying at my desk, and I was binge drinking more and more. I had had a drinking habit prior to this, but then after this experience, and as things got worse and worse and worse, my binge drinking increased. And everyone at work stopped talking to me because I was suddenly now no longer a fun person to be around, no longer easy to get along with. And it began with my manager. My manager literally stopped talking to me. And everyone else followed suit. So these were good people. Every single person I worked with was smart, generous, a really, really good person. And yet nobody knew what to do. We had no way of talking about what was happening at work. We had even no way of talking really well about work itself, about the structures and systems and processes. We didn't talk about that. We just sort of came in and did it. And when everything started to fall apart for me, we had no way of responding well. And when I think about this from a risk factors perspective, I had all of them going on. I had a family history. So my father had experienced depression for a significant part of his life. I had childhood trauma myself, of sexual abuse, significant sexual abuse in my childhood. I had a lot of personal stress going on at this time, including like a lawsuit in my family, including some very difficult deaths of people who were really important to me. I had workplace stress that I've just shared some of what was going on. And there's an emerging factor in the literature that's telling us that social isolation is a risk factor for developing a mental health condition. And I was now socially isolated at work too. So what I knew, part of me knew I needed help. And I started to reach out for services. I went to my doctor, and I kept going repeatedly because I had the neck pain from the whiplash injury until eventually I said to her, you need to screen me for mental health. And she did. And she said, oh, it looks like you have depression. So that's the diagnosis that was settled upon. But it actually, I'm suggesting, doesn't actually represent my full experience. I view my experience through the lens of trauma. Everything that was happening to me at work was traumatic. The loss of the relationships. It was a physical trauma that happened to me with the whiplash injury. And I also reached out for counseling with the employee assistance program. And I had to make up a new problem every 3 visits because there was a cap. And so it was effective, but not that effective really, because we couldn't have good long-term care for me. So even though I was going to the doctor, I was doing everything I was supposed to be doing, I was taking medication, nothing was helping at work. And I ended up going off work because I was so incapable of being well and being happy and being productive at work. And while I was off work, I began to notice what I was missing. And it's interesting because even though work itself was so stressful for me and full of so much pain and difficulty, I actually wanted to be working. And that puzzled me. So this is when I began to think, well, why do I want to go back so badly? And it's because work gives us so many things more than just the income. It gives us identity. When you are working and someone says, so what do you do? Which is a very common question that we get asked. You meet someone at a party or some kind of social situation to get to know you better as a person. You're asked the question, so what do you do? And when you're not working, for whatever reason, it's really hard to have a word, a term, or even to describe like the profession or something, because even say you are a nurse or a teacher, and you're not doing that, do you actually say that? Do you say, well, I'm a nurse, but I'm not actually really that because I'm not like, it's very difficult. How do you identify? Work gives us activity. So something where there's some predictability about the thing you're going to be doing on any given day. Work gives us sometimes meaningful contribution. It gives us routine. So it's that reason to get out of bed. And work gives us social connection. We spend more time with the people we work with than the people we love and live with. More waking hours are spent with the people at work. And we need those social connections. That information informs us that we belong. It informs us of who we are as a human being, as a social creature. And we get it from the people we love and live with. And we also get it to a huge degree from the people we work with. So when I went back to work, it was a very difficult time. And I struggled. I continued to struggle. Now, by this time, though, I had access to cognitive behavioral therapy. And I was able to have some sense of regulating my emotional responses. But it didn't help because all of my workplace relationships had deteriorated so badly. And I asked for mediation because we were communication skills specialists. So it's a bit ironic as I say that. And I asked for mediation because I kept thinking, we can figure this out. We can do this. I love this work. I don't want to give up this work. And I could envision being back in the good graces with all of my colleagues because we were a fun, fabulous group of people. And when we were sitting in mediation and I had described my experience and everybody else had described theirs, the mediators said, well, this is what we're going to do. We're going to have, this is what they said to me. Donna, we're going to have everybody sit in a circle and they are all going to tell you the impact that your behavior has had on them. And I had a moment of change there. So my moment was, I realized if I do that, and if I sit and listen to all of their anger and their rage at me, that I'm not going to make it home. Because throughout this whole time, every day, all day, I bargained with myself for my life. I thought about suicide every day, all day. Everything I did was either closer to suicide or protecting myself from suicide. So I had this constant narrative going through my mind that I could die. I could just avoid all of this pain, all of this struggle. I could just die. And it's in that moment, I also knew, wait a minute, I don't want to die. Like, I don't want to die. And it was a huge moment for me to have me say to me, I don't want to die. It was fabulous. It came from a place of such desire to connect to meaning, connect to hope, connect to the positivity in the world. And it's like the scales fell from my eyes and I saw, wait a minute, this is just a job. So I then applied my cognitive behavioral therapy skills to doing my resume. And I was able to do that because the problem was, while I was trying to write my resume, I would have panic attacks because I would be thinking, who would possibly want to hire me? I'm a horrible human being, according to all my coworkers. I was really struggling with productivity. I was struggling with mental clarity because I had a lot of mental confusion at this time. It was getting better with the medication and with the therapy, but it was still taking time. But I did my resume and I was able to send it out, and I quickly reinvented myself. I was hired by the Canadian Mental Health Association to work on their new program for training people in workplaces on workplace mental health. And my story became part of the training. So now I am a public speaker. So, and this all was happening very quickly, and I wasn't well, but I had incredible support at work. I had a strong set of colleagues around me who knew everything that had happened to me, and they were kind and caring. I had a great manager who understood that from time to time I needed to adjust the way I worked or my work schedule. And things were starting to get really, really good. I was still drinking heavily. And it was another year before I got good help for that. And that's actually an example of a deeply fragmented system, because I was doing cognitive behavioral therapy with a psychiatrist. And when I said to her, I really want to work on the role of alcohol in my life, I need to figure out how to not be so dependent upon it, how to not have it control me. And she put up her hand and said, I don't do addictions. So that's a problem with the system. I eventually, because now I was working in mental health, I knew about an addiction program, and I started there. And it was ironic because a lot of what we did was cognitive behavioral therapy with addiction information and supports inside of it. So that's when I believe my recovery truly began, because I now had good work where I was able to meet many of my human needs at work were now being met. And I was able to start having my well-being as a concept for myself. And certainly it's an ongoing process. This is not something that I ever say, I'm recovered. I never say that. This is something I'm always having to be aware of. And so what's worked for me is decreasing the negatives and increasing the positives. So each of us is very different. So what works for me in terms of increasing positives will be very different than for other people. And the same thing with decreasing the negatives. And while there are some universal truths that certainly we know that it's really important for people to move their bodies. So physical activity is important, nutrition, eliminating substances that alter mood like alcohol, caffeine. So managing caffeine, having good sleep hygiene, like we know these are all true. And all of those play out for me too. There's other things that are specific to me. So I'm very careful about who I invite to be in my life. And I'm a social butterfly. I love people. I'm an extrovert. I love that. And I began to realize that it's actually not best for me to have a lot of social contact. It's best for me to be really noticing where my energy goes, where I get energy and where I lose energy, so that I'm not depleted anymore. I am very careful about having quiet in my life, a lot more quiet than other people might have. So it means I've also limited a lot of the things that I do in terms of producing, because quiet is very important for me to maintain a sense of calm and regulation in my body and in my mind. I've had many types of therapy, and the latest one that was incredibly helpful for me was called brain spotting. And with brain spotting, I have learned and have adapted many really helpful behaviors to help me with that regulation, to get me that if I am escalating or deteriorating in terms of my mood, I am able to regulate and get myself back into stability again. I also truly value giving back. So sharing my story is part of giving back. I have become involved in peer support. And peer support is a fascinating world in which we who have a history of mental health struggles, we receive training and we are then able to connect with other people who are just a little, not as further along in their recovery as we are. And it's the idea of being side by side with someone who's been on this path, who understands the challenges, who is able to say, hey, I'm one of those people who has struggled with mental health, who has a history of a mental health condition. I'm one of those. So it cuts through the stigma. I also have contributed my story to the development of training so that we can change what happens in workplaces. And I really think about things like some key questions I ask, like, why did this happen to me? And the thing is, whenever I have told this story, I have people lining up and they come to me and they say, you're telling my story too. So that is a very interesting question for me. So what are the root causes of all these types of struggles? Not just mine, but also everyone I was working with. What's root cause inside of this? What could we all have done differently? How could our work have been organized differently? How could we have been managed differently to prevent harm to all of us? So when we look at the value of work in our lives, we can think about those social determinants of health and why it is crucial for us to be thinking about work, not just doing it unconsciously. We can be more mindful about the actual act of working. And one of the systems I like to use is human needs at work. So this is the idea of looking at things a little differently so that we can understand ourselves and perhaps each other better. So things like considering when something happens, how does this affect our sense of achievement or maybe alignment, autonomy, belonging, clarity, growth, harmony, integrity, recognition, safety, self-efficacy, and support. And all of these human needs at work are important. All of them, to varying degrees, will be met or will be not met. And we can think about our struggles inside of this lens, and it helps us, I think, get more connected to the idea that having work matters, absolutely. And what happens to us at work matters. And that's because our human needs at work matter. Social support matters for all of us. Our unique experience inside all of this matters. So we can think differently about this thing called work. We need much more than screening. We need much more than getting people into services, which are of themselves fragmented, difficult. We need much more than just reactive measures. It's about looking at this through a holistic lens, culture, community, social responsibility, and even public health. And by offering the gift of your time and attention with me here today, we are beginning to make real the vision that working can be a source of belonging, meaning, harmony, and health. Thank you so much.